What do you think of when you hear the word war? Is it this? Or maybe this? Well, there's a different type of war you may have heard a lot about recently.
Trade war worries igniting.
Is the trade war back on?
Trade war.
Trade war, full-blown trade war.
The weapons in a trade war are everywhere. It's the food you eat, the train you ride to work, and the laptop you're probably watching this video on.
As a consumer, you're probably consuming imports. If we have a trade war and we start slapping tariffs on all of those imports, the bill is going to be higher.
If the world relies so much on trade, what is a trade war?
This is China, this is the US, and this small bean could become a pawn in an emerging trade war simmering between these two giants. This is a story of a bean, some tariffs, and the impact it may have on you.
China threatening to disrupt the world economy.
These tariffs pose a serious risk to our economy. They could trigger a trade war, and they may damage our relations with key allies.
A months-long investigation found that China violates American intellectual property rights and steals trade secrets through cyber hacking. But to remedy that through tariffs is widely expected to trigger Chinese retaliation.
I don't think they can let it go. I mean, just looking at the domestic politics, it will be showing the weakness to just let it go.
Farmers are especially vulnerable. Many American crops are exported to China. If China retaliates with tariffs of its own, profits would disappear. Even without Chinese action, U.S. consumers could get hit. Those cheap Chinese goods Americans are so used to buying, all of a sudden, not so cheap. The Retail Industry Leaders Association, which represents Target, Walmart, and Costco, warned the White House these tariffs may be aimed at China, but the bill will be charged to American consumers who will pay more at the checkout for the items they shop for every day. More evidence Trump's target is China. The U.S. granted more exceptions to the steel and aluminum tariffs, which take effect Friday. They will no longer apply to the European Union, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, and South
Korea. Of Beijing, dinner is served for some of farmer Yang Feli's 800 pigs. China's growing middle class has meant a bigger appetite for meat, but his pigs wouldn't grow or survive without soybean meal, much of which is imported from the U.S.
Soybean meal is a feed which provides nutritional balance and protein.
And now Farmer Yang could be paying a lot more to feed them, after China announced it would be slapping imports of U.S. soybeans with a 25% tariff. The levy will also be added to more than 100 other American goods, including cars and planes.
China has never given in to external pressure. External pressure will only make Chinese people even more determined.
China is firing back in response to a list of items released by the Trump administration yesterday. President Trump says it's about leveling the playing field.
China is going to end up treating us fairly. For many years they had free rein. They don't have free rein anymore.
The political pressure will be high on President Trump and his base of support in many soybean-growing states. And farmers will be hit hard, says Paul Burke, the North Asia Regional Director for the U.S. Soybean Export Council.
It will have a negative impact on the prices that U.S. soybean farmers will receive. And soybean farmers are already just barely getting by on the margins that they're receiving. And anything that would depress that price would have a serious detrimental impact to those farmers.
Putting levies on U.S. soybeans, which are also used to make cooking oil, is a high-stakes move for China as it risks food inflation domestically. Many had believed it would be too sensitive for Beijing to touch, but they were wrong, says economist Jeremy Stevens.
This idea that you can sort of pressure China into different positions, that's proven to not be true. And China isn't afraid to do things that markets struggle to, as I say, metabolize.
But China is quick to remind the U.S. that it threw the first punches, starting with 30% duties on solar panels and washing machines, then the 25% tariffs on imported steel and 10% on aluminium just weeks ago. The move forced Huayang Steel Mill in China's northern Hebei province to shift its strategy of focusing on the American market this year.
The part of our industry which exports to America is facing a big loss. Orders have decreased by at least half.
The measures were Washington's first strike in a battle to address a global trade imbalance. But while exemptions have since been given to US allies, including Canada, Australia, and the European Union, the White House is making sure China continues to feel the pinch. America's trade deficit with China, comprised mostly of computers and other electronics, soared to $375 billion last year, according to US figures, up 8% from 2016. But Chinese analysts like Bianyong Zhu of Renmin University say this isn't what these tariffs are really about.
Where there's a political dispute resulting in higher tariffs, the purpose isn't to solve a trade imbalance or trade dispute between China and the US. It's more a release of anger.
Justified anger, according to some. The US has long accused Beijing of unfair trade practices, including relying on state subsidies and stealing intellectual property. American companies operating in China say they're forced to spill tech secrets in order to set up shop.
This is the most important economic relationship in the world. It's important for both countries, and yet it's lopsided. And we need to do something to get a level playing field, and talking for 20 years has not done it. So I guess the administration's saying, let's try something else.
That something else has sparked panic from businesses on both sides of the Pacific. A group of retailers, including Walmart and Macy's, sent a letter to the Trump administration late last month, urging a rethink on extra levies on household items, such as bedding, clothing, and electronics routinely imported from China. While the new tariffs avoid these goods for now, costs will increase for American manufacturers who depend on Chinese machinery and imported parts. Washington's plan targets robotics, new energy vehicles, and telecommunications. It's a tense time for tech companies in Beijing.
This is Beijing's Zhongguancun, an area known as China's Silicon Valley. Many of the companies based here are worried their exports to the US will be affected by these new tariffs. PBS NewsHour approached dozens of these firms for comment, but all of them declined, scared to speak out due to the sensitivity of the climate.
Francis Bi helps Chinese tech startups crack the US market and says American consumers will pay the price for Chinese goods being shut out.
It just means less options at a more cost-effective price. At the end of the day, really, it's going to be the consumers that sort of lose out because they might not be able to get the latest and best technology.
Beijing already slapped $3 billion worth of tariffs on more than 100 American products this week, including fruit and wine.
We have wines for 45 kwai, which is really a very good deal.
It's bad news for Beijing-based wine importer Claudia Masuga, who's waiting on an order for 14,000 bottles of Californian Red, and will soon find out whether she'll have to foot higher taxes for them.
We do have to see. The next container of American wine will arrive on the 6th of April. We will discover it. Of course, we are not happy to pay more tax. Who would be? And at the end of the day, it's also not good for the consumers because they then have to pay even more.
It's not just consumers paying the price for this brewing trade war. As farmers and industry groups deal with the fallout from today's announcement, others are bracing themselves for more possible tit-for-tat measures. But from China, analysts say the message is clear.
The United States is trying to play bad cop to a sort of society that doesn't want to be policed in that way by the United States.
And so far, the escalation is showing no sign of letting up. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Katrina Yu in Beijing.
Made in America, a symbol for high-quality pork served at home plate. This American-style barbecue restaurant in a trendy Beijing neighborhood favored by expats and Chinese locals alike. But that's now a source of anxiety for General Manager Charles D. Pillay.
Well, I mean, realistically, if the price goes up, we have to raise our prices. So we're going to have to make a choice as to whether the customers are willing to pay that, or we have to use domestic meat. We've tried Spanish Iberico pork before, which is a little more expensive, and it didn't just taste quite right. Domestic pork, the cuts on the ribs aren't right, and it just doesn't taste as good. Really, the simple fact is just the American pork is better.
Like many restaurants serving American pork across China, Homeplate is facing a 25% price spike on its star meat. President Trump has ordered tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods starting July 6th, and Beijing has vowed to retaliate with U.S. pork on the list. A person familiar with China's plan said the tariffs will go into effect start of Friday. But the finance ministry Wednesday said it will, quote, absolutely not be the first to deliver the opening strike in what promises to be a prolonged trade war, even though Friday in Beijing starts 12 hours before it does in Washington. China's foreign ministry spokesman Lu Kang clarifying that doesn't mean Beijing is backing down. He said China has already made preparations. As long as the United States issues a so-called tariff list, China will take necessary measures to firmly protect its legitimate interests.
These ribs are really good. I mean, they're so good. They're amazing.
But with Trump already warning he'll step up the fight with another round of tariffs, this trade war could cut right.
More tariffs coming China's way as U.S. President Donald Trump directed the U.S. Trade Representative's office to draw up a list of $200 billion of Chinese goods for an additional 10% tariff. President Trump said that the new tariff would go into effect unless Beijing changes course on its own trade actions on U.S. goods and addresses the theft of American intellectual property by Chinese companies. This latest round of tariffs follows an official announcement by U.S. government 3 days ago on $50 billion of Chinese goods that are subject to a new 25% tariff starting July.
Who knows where it will end? Today, the trade hawks are winning the battle.
There can be all the talks in the world. It wouldn't change the result.
I'm not so confident in the short run about any resolution.
I don't believe it will last several years because both sides cannot afford such a cost for taking such a war.
I think there are three possibilities, none of them good. The first one is that the U.S. loses the trade war and that this hurts consumers in the United States because of higher prices for imported Chinese goods. It hurts the exporters in the United States because of the increased cost of production and limits on their markets. The second is that it's bad for both the United States and China, that the retaliatory tariffs going back and forth hurt both economies, slow the growth, or in the worst case scenario, cause recession in one or both countries. And the third situation that would be the worst for the world is that the war triggers a global recession. Other countries in the world whose economies are not as strong as China or the United States drift into recession, and then it's a cascading effect that hurts the global financial system and consumers around the world.
This is not about trade. It's about shifting in power. This has started. The shifting of power has started since 2008. It's just really speeded up with the inauguration of Donald Trump. He has a worldview that is zero-sum. So if a country wins, the other country must lose. And he thinks that America loses in this situation. So someone has to pay.
I'm afraid that it will continue for some time because President Trump's advisors are very supportive of protectionism. They're very nervous and skeptical of China's economic system and China's economic rise. So I think as long as they are his chief advisors, it will continue. As the stock market in America is shaken, and of course in China the stock market is shaken, that will put some pressure on the Trump administration. And in addition to that, there are the tariffs that China will reciprocate on the U.S. that will hurt American automobile manufacturing. Even today, Harley-Davidson motorcycle companies said they're going to move to Europe. American soybeans and agriculture will be challenged. So I think there will be pressure put on American industries that will therefore put pressure on President Trump's White House. And so I think there's a chance that he will lift it, but I think China's not going to make immediate concessions. And so we see this step up one by one.
President Trump is very intelligent, I have to say, because I read his books and 20 years before when he was a merchandiser, and he's a clever trader, when he negotiates with somebody, his principle is that if you know what you need, you have to try your best to get it. This is his principle. Now I think he's in practicing how to realize his goal and philosophy. And his personality, his mentality will help him to reach his goals. But now I think it's a good time for Trump to know the Chinese philosophy, know Chinese wisdom, that how to negotiate and help him to get his goal.